The skyscraper of Knight Enterprises towered over Manhattan, like a monument to power and ambition, its glass walls gleaming even at midnight. Inside the halls were silent except for the faint squeak of a mop against the polished floor. Amanda Carter moved with careful precision, her janitor uniform worn but neat, her tired eyes focused on the task. She had been cleaning for hours, her hands rough from bleach, her back sore from bending, yet she pressed on with determination. Because this job was not just about money, it was about survival. She had debts to pay and a younger sister at home to support. She had once dreamed of becoming an architect, of designing buildings instead of scrubbing them. But life had forced her onto a different path. Tonight, that path was about to twist into something unimaginable. As she bent to wring out her mop, a voice startled her from behind. "Mr. Knight wants to see you." Amanda froze, looking up to see the CEO's assistant holding the glass door open. For a moment, Amanda thought she had misheard. "Me?" she asked, pointing to herself with a trembling hand. The assistant gave a curt nod. "Now." Amanda's chest tightened. She had never spoken directly to Alexander Knight, though everyone in the company knew his reputation. He was ruthless in the boardroom, brilliant in strategy, and utterly untouchable. Rumors painted him as cold, calculating a man who viewed everything as a transaction. Her heart hammered as she wiped her palms on her uniform and stepped through the door. The CEO's office was a vast room drenched in shadows and moonlight. Dark wood panels lined the walls, and shelves of leather-bound books stretched behind a massive mahogany desk. At its center sat Alexander Knight. His suit jacket hung neatly on his chair, his white shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, the lamplight catching the sharp planes of his face. His dark hair fell across his forehead in a way that seemed too careless to be unintentional. He looked up slowly as Amanda entered, removing his glasses, and his piercing gaze locked onto her. Amanda's throat went dry. She clutched her rag like a shield. "Mr. Knight," she stammered, "is there something you need me to clean?" For a long moment he said nothing, studying her as though she were another figure in one of his financial reports. Then, in a voice smooth and firm, he spoke. "I will pay you $3 million. Amanda blinked, certain she had misheard. "Sir," she whispered. His eyes never left hers. "I will pay you $3 million if you give me a child." The words sliced through the air like a blade. Amanda's jaw dropped, her rag slipped from her hands, and she stared at him as though he had lost his mind. Her chest burned with a mixture of shock and anger. "Did you just say, me a janitor?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Yes, you," he answered evenly, as though the proposal were no stranger than offering her overtime pay. Amanda staggered back, her mind spinning. $3 million was a number beyond her imagination. It was enough to change her family's life forever, to pay every debt, to put her sister through school, to buy back the dream she had buried years ago. But the very idea of it made her stomach twist with revulsion. She pressed a hand to her chest, her voice trembling. "I clean floors, Mr. Knight, not babies." Alexander leaned forward, his expression still unreadable. "You have 24 hours to decide," he said coldly. "Refuse and you lose this job." Amanda felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under her. He was not only serious, he was threatening her livelihood. Her lips trembled with fury. "I do not know what kind of games you rich men play," she whispered, "but this is insane." He did not blink. He simply slid his glasses back on and dismissed her with a flick of his gaze. 24 hours, Miss Carter. Think carefully. Her legs nearly gave out as she turned and left the office. The hallway seemed endless as she staggered back to her cart, her breath sharp and uneven. The opulent walls mocked her, reminding her of how little power she had in this world. She wanted to scream, to cry, to laugh at the absurdity, but all she could do was press a trembling hand against the marble wall to steady herself. $3 million. The number echoed in her head, a steady drumbeat of temptation and terror. It could buy freedom. It could buy her sister a future. It could give her back the life she had once dreamed of. And yet, what would it cost her? Her dignity, her body, her future. Amanda closed her eyes, her pulse thundering in her ears. What kind of decision was this? She had faced poverty, humiliation, exhaustion, but never a choice that cut this deep. She whispered to herself, almost too softly to hear, "What would $3 million do to my life?" Alexander Knight had been born into privilege, but privilege had not shielded him from wounds that carved deep into his soul. For his father, a powerful financier, had abandoned the family when Alexander was still a boy, chasing another woman, and leaving Alexander and his mother to endure the humiliation in the public eye. And though money was never scarce, love became something that felt like a dangerous illusion. His mother withered under the pressure, falling ill, and by the time Alexander was in his early 20s, she was gone, leaving behind only lessons about appearances, duty, and survival lessons that hardened him into the man who had become a ruthless CEO, a man who saw every interaction through the lens of deals and contracts, a man who no longer trusted the fragility of love because love had destroyed his family's foundation. And so when his grandmother and the board of Knight Enterprises began pressuring him about the future, demanding a successor, Alexander decided that the safest path was one that removed all possibility of emotional betrayal. He did not want a wife. He did not want to pretend. At romance, he wanted an heir, and he wanted it under his control, which is why the idea of hiring someone to bear his child made sense to him, even if the world would find it cold and monstrous in his mind. It was clean controlled and without the chaos that emotions brought. Yet when his eyes had landed on Amanda Carter, the janitor working quietly in the shadows of his empire, something about her had stirred his curiosity. Though he refused to admit it to himself, the truth was that Amanda reminded him of what authenticity looked like. Someone who was not posturing for wealth or power, someone who did not belong to his gilded world. And though his offer to her was rooted in cold logic, there was an ember deep down he did not dare acknowledge. Amanda's backstory was of a completely different fabric, woven with hardship, sacrifice, and stubborn resilience, for she had grown up in a small rural town where her father worked in construction until an accident left him unable to provide, and her mother took double shifts at diners to keep food on the table. Amanda had always been gifted at drawing filling sketchbooks with buildings and designs, dreaming of one day becoming an architect. Her teachers encouraged her, saying she had the spark of vision and she had earned a place at a state university. But tuition was too heavy a burden. And though she tried to juggle classes and jobs, the mounting bills and her father's medical expenses forced her to drop out, leaving her dream in tatters. Yet she never threw away her sketchbooks. She carried one with her, even during janitorial shifts, sneaking in quick sketches during breaks, little blueprints of the life she still longed for, as if drawing the future could keep it alive, and every stroke of her pencil was a rebellion against despair. She worked nights at Night Enterprises because the pay was steady and the hours allowed her to help her younger sister by day. Her sister was still in high school, and Amanda refused to let her give up her education. Amanda had sworn that her sister would graduate, maybe even go to college. Even if Amanda herself could not, she would pass her dream forward if she had to, and that vow kept her going through long nights of mopping floors and emptying trash bins. When she was summoned into Alexander's office that night, she expected scolding, perhaps even firing. Never a proposition that turned her world upside down, and as she stumbled back to her cart, the number 3 million spun in her head, like a golden key opening doors she had never dared imagine. It could pay off her father's debts. It could send her sister to college. Without fear, it could buy her time to return to school herself and finally pursue architecture. It could rewrite everything, but the way it was offered made her feel like nothing more than a commodity, like her worth was measured only in the child she could produce, and the thought burned her with humiliation and anger. What Alexander did not know, at least not yet, was that Amanda was not a woman who surrendered easily. Poverty had not broken her disappointment, had not erased her fire. She had faced rejection, debt, and sleepless nights. Yet her will was intact. She had told herself countless times that she would not let circumstances dictate who she became. And even in the lowest work, she carried herself with dignity. Because in her mind, work was work, and her dreams could survive as long as she refused to kill them. And though Alexander saw only a janitor when he made his offer, he would soon discover the force of someone who still dared to hope. For Alexander, the motivations were about control and legacy for Amanda. The motivations were about survival and the stubborn pursuit of dreams. Two paths colliding in one absurd contract, and beneath the surface, both of them were carrying wounds they did not want to expose. Alexander hiding behind contracts, and Amanda behind her mop and her sketchbook. Yet destiny was pushing them into each other's orbit, and as Amanda wrestled with the impossible choice, she felt torn between her pride and her desperate needs, asking herself if $3 million was a lifeline or a trap, if agreeing would make her a prisoner or free her to chase what she had lost. And as dawn broke outside the skyscraper, she held her sketchbook tightly in her arms, whispering to herself that no matter what happened next, she would never stop dreaming, even if the world tried to buy her soul. Amanda spent the next day in a haze every step at work, heavy with the weight of Alexander Knight's words, her mind a storm of anger, confusion, and desperate calculation, because the proposal was both insulting and intoxicating, a promise of salvation, wrapped in humiliation, and as much as she wanted to slam the door on the idea, the thought of her sister's future and the endless debts pulled her back to it again and again, until by the evening she felt trapped inside a cage of her own need. So when Alexander summoned her once more to his office, she walked in with trembling hands, but fire in her eyes, determined to confront him. He sat behind his desk as before, calm, collected, like a king awaiting a subject, his gaze sharp and unreadable as he asked simply, "Have you come to a decision, Miss Carter?" His tone devoid of warmth, as though her entire life could be measured in a yes or no. And Amanda's jaw tightened as she answered, "I came to tell you that what you are asking is wrong. You treat a child like a business deal, like another company to acquire, and you think I am desperate enough to sell myself for it." Alexander did not flinch. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, and said, "Everything in life has a price. Miss Carter, the question is whether you are willing to name yours." His words slicing through the air like steel, and Amanda felt her anger rise, her pride bristling, yet beneath it all, the number 3 million glowed like forbidden treasure. She took a breath and met his eyes. "If you think I will do this without conditions, you are mistaken," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, and Alexander's brow arched slightly. "Intrigued, go on," he murmured, and Amanda's heart raced, but she pressed forward. "If I agree, I will not just be a womb for hire. My dreams matter too. I want funds to return to school, to finish my degree in architecture. I want the chance to build a life beyond this contract. And if you cannot give me that, then I walk away now." For the first time, Alexander's expression shifted. Surprise flickering across his features. He had expected tears or pleading, not demands. And in that moment, Amanda Carter stopped being invisible to him. She was no longer just the janitor cleaning floors. At midnight, she was a woman with defiance in her spine and fire in her eyes. And something about that stirred an unexpected respect, though he masked it quickly behind his usual calm. "You are bold," he said slowly. "Not many would dare negotiate with me." And Amanda shot back. "Perhaps that is why you need someone like me, not afraid to remind you that people are not commodities." His lips curved in something almost like a smile, but it did not reach his eyes. Still, he nodded once. "Very well. Amanda, you will have the funds for your education. You will have the security you ask for. But remember, this agreement remains clear. The child will be mine, my heir, my responsibility. Do you understand?" Amanda clenched her fists, her pride screaming at her to run. But the vision of her sister graduating high school, of herself, sitting again in a classroom drafting blueprints instead of wiping tables, was too powerful. And though her throat ached with shame, she forced herself to nod. "I understand," she whispered. Alexander leaned forward, his voice lower. "Then it is settled. You will sign the contract tomorrow." And Amanda felt a chill sweep her as the finality of it settled over her, but she lifted her chin, determined not to let him see her weakness. "If I do this," she said, "it is not because you broke me. It is because I chose to turn your arrogance into an opportunity, and someday I will stand in a place where I no longer have to accept terms like these." His eyes narrowed as if measuring her resolve, and for the first time he did not dismiss her immediately. Instead, he studied her, perhaps recognizing that beneath her modest uniform was a spirit as unyielding as his own. And though he said nothing, Amanda felt the faintest shift in the air between them, as though this contract born of cold calculation might become something neither of them had expected. She left the office that night with the contract looming over her future, her heart heavy, but her mind aflame with determination. And as she clutched her sketchbook close, she whispered to herself that if she must sell her pride for survival, then she would at least buy back her dreams with the price. The following evening, Amanda found herself standing at the threshold of Alexander Knight's penthouse, her heart pounding so violently she feared the doorman could hear it. The city lights of Manhattan glittered behind her like 1,000 watchful eyes, and though her outward appearance was steady, her insides trembled with the weight of what she was about to do in her hand. She held the folder containing the contract, the stark legal language spelling out the terms of her agreement to bear a child for $3 million. She had read it again and again, each clause making her stomach twist tighter. Yet here she was, driven by desperation, but also by a stubborn flame that refused to die, the flame of her dream to reclaim her education and her future. The penthouse doors opened with a soft click, and she stepped into a world of glass and marble, the ceilings impossibly high, the furniture sleek and modern every corner, whispering wealth and control. Alexander stood near the window, with the skyline behind him, dressed not in a suit, but in a black shirt that clung to his frame. His presence commanding, even in silence, his eyes followed her as she entered, sharp and unreadable. And when she placed the contract on the polished table between them, his hand moved to it with calm certainty. "You understand the terms?" he asked, his voice even, and Amanda swallowed hard before nodding. "Yes, I understand," her tone, clipped though her chest ached with shame. "Good," he replied, signing his name with a swift stroke of the pen before sliding it toward her. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then gripped the pen, her hand shaking as she wrote her name, Amanda Carter, the ink sealing a decision that felt both like a betrayal of herself and a promise of hope. The moment the pen left the paper, she exhaled shakily. "It is done," she whispered, though inside it felt as if nothing would ever be the same again. Alexander closed the folder and set it aside, his eyes never leaving her, and then came a silence so heavy it pressed against her skin. Amanda shifted nervously, acutely aware of the enormity of what was expected next. Her body tensed as though preparing for a storm, and when Alexander took a step closer, she instinctively backed away. Until her shoulders brushed the cold glass of the window, his expression softened ever so slightly. Catching her fear, "I will not hurt you," he said quietly. The words simple yet disarming, and for the first time, she glimpsed something human behind the armor he wore. She nodded, clutching the strap of her bag, until her knuckles whitened her voice, barely above a whisper. "I do not know how to do this." His gaze flickered with something unreadable, neither amusement nor pity, but an odd mixture of both. "We will take it slow." He said, his tone lower now, as though coaxing her into trust. He reached out and gently removed the bag from her shoulder, placing it on the sofa, then guided her toward the center of the room. His movements controlled but not forceful, and though Amanda's heart raced, she realized he was giving her space. Not rushing, his restraint was unexpected. She had thought this man capable only of cold calculation. Yet here was a hint of tenderness, small but undeniable, and it unsettled her more than cruelty ever could. When he brushed a strand of hair from her face, her breath caught the gesture, so simple yet intimate, and she closed her eyes against the storm inside her chest, reminding herself that this was a transaction, not affection, not love yet. Her body betrayed her with every trembling inhale, every shiver that coursed down her spine. His touch was careful, as if he too were navigating unfamiliar ground, and in that moment, both of them seemed stripped of their roles. Not CEO and janitor, not billionaire and servant, but two people standing on the edge of something neither could name. The night unfolded slowly, cautiously, with Amanda torn between the shame of her decision and the unexpected gentleness she felt in him, each glance and movement testing the fragile boundary between contract and connection. And when finally their lips met, it was not the cold seal of a deal, but something warmer, hesitant yet real. Her eyes flew open in shock at herself, at him, at the undeniable current sparking between them. And though she told herself to pull away, she found her body leaning closer instead, surrendering to a moment that was not part of the agreement, but was entirely human. Hours later, as she lay staring at the ceiling, her heart still racing, she tried to make sense of what had happened. She was not supposed to feel anything. This was supposed to be mechanical, an obligation traded for money. Yet the memory of his hand steadying hers, his voice low as he told her she was safe, played over and over in her mind, stirring something dangerous, something she feared more than poverty itself, the possibility of feeling. Alexander lay beside her silent, his breathing even, but his mind, too, was restless, for he had expected nothing but compliance from Amanda, nothing but duty. Yet the sight of her trembling, yet refusing to break the sound of her voice, steady even in fear, had unsettled him, and for the first time in years, he had felt his carefully built walls crack, just enough for something unfamiliar to slip through. Amanda turned her head slightly, watching him in the dim light, and whispered to herself words she could not voice aloud. "This cannot be real. This cannot mean anything but." As she closed her eyes, clutching the sheet tight against her chest, she knew that no contract in the world could erase the truth that something had begun, that neither she nor Alexander had intended something that would complicate everything they thought they could control. In the days that followed, Amanda expected nothing but awkward silence and cold distance, for she had convinced herself that Alexander Knight was incapable of anything beyond transactions and control. Yet to her surprise, he began to speak to her in ways that unsettled the careful wall she had built. Small things at first, questions about whether she had eaten, whether the late hours were too heavy, questions that seemed meaningless but carried an unfamiliar weight. When asked by a man who usually reduced people to numbers on a page, Amanda tried to keep her answers short, to remind herself this was only a contract. But the more time they spent together, the harder it became to separate obligation from something softer. And the turning point came one evening when she accidentally left her sketchbook on the sofa of his penthouse. She realized it only after she had returned home, panic twisting her stomach, because that book was her private world filled with blueprints, drawings, and dreams she had never shared with anyone. The next night when she returned, she found it neatly placed on the table, Alexander sitting nearby, with the book open in his hands, his expression not mocking but deeply focused. "You drew these?" he asked, his voice quiet. Amanda froze, embarrassment rushing to her cheeks. "Yes," she admitted hesitantly. "They are just ideas, nothing professional." But Alexander shook his head slowly, his eyes still scanning the pages. "They are more than ideas. These are visions. You see structure and space, the way architects do." And his words pierced Amanda like light in darkness, because for the first time in years, someone acknowledged her talent as more than a childish pastime. Her throat tightened as she whispered, "It used to be my dream to study architecture, to build something lasting. But life had other plans." He closed the book, gently looking at her, with a gaze that for once held no coldness. "Then perhaps this contract is not just about what I need. Perhaps it should also be about giving you the future you lost." Amanda blinked, uncertain whether to believe him, but a part of her felt a spark reignite, a dangerous spark of hope. And that spark grew each time he asked her about her designs, each time he challenged her to explain her ideas, treating her not like a janitor, but like a mind worth hearing. And though she tried to resist, she began to smile more. In his presence, began to forget the shame of the contract and remember the joy of her passion. Meanwhile, rumors started to swirl through Knight Enterprises' whispers, spreading among employees who noticed the CEO summoning the janitor more often than anyone could explain. Some said he was eccentric, others that he was cruelly toying with her, but Amanda ignored the gossip. She had survived worse than whispers. What she could not ignore was the growing warmth she felt each time Alexander listened to her, each time he allowed a glimpse of his humanity to slip through the cracks of his armor. One night, as they sat together in the penthouse, she spoke softly. "You know, I still sketch buildings, even when I am exhausted, because drawing them reminds me that one day I could build something that stands long after I am gone." Alexander looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Legacy is everything, and until now I thought mine would only be numbers, deals, and power. But listening to you, I realize perhaps legacy can also be beauty." And Amanda's heart stumbled at his words, because they revealed a longing in him she had not expected, a longing not so different from her own. And though she reminded herself again and again that this was supposed to be business, her feelings no longer obeyed. Slowly their closeness grew in conversations, in quiet meals, where he surprised her by cooking instead of ordering takeout, in walks across the balcony where the city spread out like a constellation beneath them, moments where the distance between billionaire and janitor seemed to fade, replaced by something tender and fragile, something that made Amanda's chest ache with both joy and fear. Joy because she was finally seen, fear because she knew how easily it could shatter. For Alexander, the discovery of her sketchbook had unlocked a door. He had long closed a door to curiosity, to admiration, to something dangerously close to affection. He told himself it was foolish that he had chosen her for practical reasons alone. Yet he found himself waiting for the moments she arrived, listening for her footsteps, watching the way her eyes lit when she talked about design. And he realized he no longer saw her as just a participant in a contract, but as someone who carried within her a resilience he could not ignore, and though he fought to bury it, the truth was undeniable. Amanda Carter had begun to matter to him in ways he had sworn never to allow again. She, on the other hand, felt torn between gratitude and dread gratitude, because he was giving her space to dream again. Dread because her heart was stirring in a situation where her dignity and future were already compromised. She told herself nightly that this was only temporary, that she should not let herself hope for more. But as she watched him one evening, leaning against the balcony railing, the city lights painting his face in silver and gold, she caught herself wondering what it would be like if there were no contract, no money, no pressure from the world outside. Just two people finding each other across impossible divides. And that thought made her chest ache with both longing and terror. It began with a flash, the snap of a camera in the wrong hands at the wrong time. For one evening, as Alexander and Amanda left the office building together under the cover of night, believing the silence of the empty lobby would keep their secret safe, an employee lingered in the shadows and captured the moment, the image of the powerful billionaire, walking side by side with the janitor whose uniform marked her as invisible. The photograph spread faster than wildfire, first through hushed messages among staff, then onto the screens of gossip bloggers who lived for stories that shattered the illusion of untouchable elites. By morning, headlines screamed across the internet. Billionaire CEO linked to janitor speculation, flooding every corner of media, questions multiplying. Was it an affair? Was it blackmail? Was she pregnant? Every possibility twisted until it dripped with scandal. And Amanda, who had always been background noise in the lives of others, now found herself unwillingly thrust into a spotlight harsher than she could bear. The board of Knight Enterprises gathered in fury, gray-haired men and sharply dressed women glaring at Alexander across the conference table, demanding explanations, demanding control. Their voices rising with accusations that he was risking the company's reputation, that investors would flee, that the empire built on his name would collapse if he did not sever whatever tie he had with the janitor. One director even sneered, "If you want a child, hire someone discreet, but this is reckless and disgusting." And Alexander sat still, jaw-clenched rage simmering under his calm facade. Yet when his eyes slid to Amanda, who stood just outside the glass doors, waiting nervously, all he saw was her face, pale with shame and fear, and his anger lashed out at the wrong place. The moment the meeting ended, he stormed into the hall, his voice low but cutting as he faced her. "Do you realize what you have done? You are a liability." Amanda flinched, as though struck, her chest tightening with hurt, her voice breaking as she whispered, "So I am just your mistake after all." Alexander's expression hardened his pride, too wounded to soften his words. Yes, and her eyes filled with tears. She refused to let fall, in front of him, with trembling hands. She pulled the sketchbook from her bag, the one thing she had always carried as her secret sanctuary, and placed it on the nearby table. "If that is what I am to you, then take this too, because it seems everything I hold dear turns into something you can break." Then she walked away, her footsteps echoing in the cold hallway. Each step a piece of her dignity, leaving behind the man who had demanded her body and then dismissed her soul. The following days were suffocating. Amanda kept her head down as rumors spread through every corridor. Employees whispered behind cupped hands, some with pity, others with cruelty, calling her opportunist, gold digger, seductress. And though she wanted to scream the truth that she had never asked for this, she bore the silence, carrying her pain like a stone in her chest, until finally she could not face it any longer and handed in her resignation, disappearing from the building with nothing but her few belongings and the hollow ache of betrayal. Meanwhile, Alexander pretended control, issuing statements through public relations that deflected questions, attending meetings, as though nothing had shifted. But every night when he returned to his penthouse, the absence of Amanda's presence burned at him. The silence was no longer peaceful but oppressive, and when his eyes landed on the sketchbook she had left behind, something inside him cracked. He opened it and saw the lines of buildings she dreamed to create, the details precise, yet full of heart, and for the first time he felt shame, heavier than any boardroom reprimand, because he realized he had crushed someone whose only crime was daring to dream while trapped in poverty. Yet the world outside did not care for his guilt. The scandal grew as tabloids speculated Amanda had vanished because she was carrying his child, and investors whispered of pulling out the board, gave him an ultimatum: clean this up or step down. And though Alexander had faced countless battles in business, nothing unsettled him like the thought that he might have lost the one person who had seen him not as a CEO, but as a man. He found himself staring at her sketches late into the night, wondering where she had gone, wondering if she would ever forgive him, but the memory of her voice whispering, "So I am just your mistake," haunted him, and he feared the damage could not be undone. Amanda, meanwhile, tried to build a fragile routine, away from the chaos, taking odd jobs, staying out of sight, clutching her stomach whenever waves of nausea struck, for though she had not confirmed it, yet deep down she knew her body was changing. The possibility that she carried Alexander's child was both terrifying and miraculous. She wanted to deny it to erase him from her future. But every morning when she looked at her reflection, she saw the truth in her own trembling eyes. And as the scandal continued to rage in the city, she wondered if she could ever find peace again. Torn between the shame of what had happened and the secret hope that maybe, just maybe, the life growing inside her could become the one thing worth enduring all the pain. Amanda had been ignoring the signs for weeks, convincing herself that the nausea was from exhaustion and the dizziness from too many long shifts. But when she stood in the cramped bathroom of her apartment, staring at the faint lines on the pregnancy test, her world shifted entirely. Her knees weakened and she sank onto the floor with a small stick clutched in trembling hands, tears pricking her eyes as fear and wonder collided inside her. She whispered to herself that she was carrying Alexander's child, the child of a man who had treated her like a transaction, then called her a mistake, yet inside her there was now a life innocent and fragile, and the reality of it broke her open in ways she had not expected. Part of her wanted to run far away, to protect the baby from the crushing weight of scandal, but another part remembered the promises she had made to herself about building a better life, and she realized she could no longer think only of survival. She had to think of legacy, too. Alexander discovered her absence weighed more heavily than any board meeting or investor threat. Nights grew longer and silence heavier until one evening he opened the sketchbook Amanda had left behind and truly looked at it, every line carrying her vision, every stroke revealing the determination of someone who saw beauty even in struggle, and he felt something shift. Shame clawed at him for calling her a liability, for discarding her in front of the board when she had only been pulled into his world by his own demand. And when his grandmother confronted him the following day, she did not speak with softness but with steel, telling him that the scandal was destroying not only his image but the company's foundation. "You need to fix this," she said sharply. "Turn this mess into redemption. If there is a child, then you claim it and you protect it. If there is a woman you have wronged, then you do not let her face the storm alone. Our name has survived generations because we knew when to stand firm," and her words pierced through Alexander's pride, forcing him to see what he had tried to ignore. That night he found himself tracing the city streets until he reached the neighborhood Amanda had once mentioned. He searched until he found the dimly lit building she now called home, his chest tightening at the thought of her living there while he sat in a glass tower above the city. He climbed the narrow staircase and knocked his pulse thundering louder than any boardroom confrontation. and when the door finally opened, Amanda stood there pale and wary, her hand unconsciously brushing her stomach, her eyes widening in shock at the sight of him. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice shaking with both anger and fear. Alexander drew a breath, his pride warring with the desperation that had driven him, and he said simply, "I do not just want the baby, Amanda. I want you." The words tumbling out more raw than he intended. Amanda blinked, stunned, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You want me," she repeated, "after calling me a liability, after humiliating me in front of your world, after making me feel like I was worth nothing." Her voice broke as tears threatened. "Do you think words erase all that?" Alexander's throat tightened as he shook his head. "No, I was wrong, I was cruel, and I regret every word. I let my pride speak instead of my heart, and it cost me you." Amanda hugged herself, shaking. "You do not know what it cost me. I am carrying this child, and all I can think is that one day you will walk away, just like your father did to your family. Because men like you do not stay, they use and discard." Alexander stepped closer, his eyes fierce. "I am not my father, Amanda. I will not walk away. I swear to you I will not repeat his sins." Her tears spilled then, because she wanted to believe him, but fear clawed at her chest, and she whispered, "I am terrified. I am terrified of being looked at as nothing more than the janitor who trapped a billionaire, terrified of raising a child, alone while the world mocks me." Alexander reached for her hands, gently prying them from her arms, his touch steady. "You are not nothing. You are the bravest woman I have ever known, and I see you, Amanda. I see your dreams, your fire, your strength. You showed me that life is not just about control. It is about building something that lasts, and I cannot build it without you." Her lips trembled as she searched his face for lies, but all she saw was a man stripped bare of his armor, desperate and flawed, but sincere, and her heart cracked open against her will. She whispered, "Actions, not words, Alexander. If you mean what you say, then prove it. Prove that I am not just a mistake to you." He nodded without hesitation. I will spend the rest of my life proving it." And in that fragile moment, standing in the dim light of her modest apartment, Amanda realized that perhaps the turning point of her life was not the contract she had signed, but the possibility of a future she had not dared to imagine. A future where love and legacy were not at odds. And though doubt still lingered like a shadow, a spark of hope flickered inside her chest, fragile but alive. Amanda could not sleep that night after Alexander's visit. Her mind was a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Half of her wanted to slam the door on him forever and protect herself from more wounds. The other half ached with the longing in his voice, the sincerity in his eyes, and the undeniable truth that she had been missing him skin as she hated him. She lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of her small apartment, one hand resting gently on her stomach, whispering to the life growing inside her that she would not let fear dictate her choices. But her heart still trembled with doubt. When dawn came and the city stirred awake, she found herself walking, almost without realizing, toward the tall building of Knight Enterprises, each step heavy yet inevitable, as if drawn to the man she wanted so badly to trust, and yet could not. When she arrived, she slipped past the stares of employees who still whispered behind her back, until she reached his office where he sat alone, his posture rigid, his eyes weary. But the moment they landed on her, something softened. Amanda closed the door and faced him, her voice cracking before the words even formed. "I cannot do this. I cannot keep pretending that everything is fine because it is not. I am scared." Alexander, terrified of what the world thinks of me. Terrified of what you will do when this becomes too heavy. And more than anything, I am terrified of how much I want to believe you. The confessions spilled out in a rush, leaving her breathless, her tears finally breaking free. Alexander rose quickly and crossed the room, his usually calm exterior cracking. "Amanda," he whispered, his voice raw. "I know I hurt you. I know my pride made me cruel. But listen to me now. I will not leave you, not you and not our child. You have every reason to doubt me, but I am begging you. Let me show you that I can be more than the man who made you feel small." She shook her head, pressing her hands to her face. "You do not understand. I have spent my whole life being invisible, cleaning floors, taking care of my family, giving up everything I wanted. And when you offered me money to have your child, I told myself it was just a deal. A way to buy back my dreams, but somewhere along the way, you became more than the contract. And that terrifies me, because if I let myself love you and you walk away, I will be broken in ways I cannot survive." Alexander reached for her wrists, gently pulling her hands down so he could see her face streaked with tears. His own eyes shining with an emotion he rarely let anyone see Amanda. He said, "I love you," the words slipping out unplanned, yet truer than anything he had ever spoken. Her breath caught her body freezing, as if the ground had vanished beneath her. She stared at him wide-eyed, her voice shaking. "You cannot mean that you do not love you. Make deals, you sign contracts, you build walls. But love is not something you know." His lips curved into a broken smile. "Maybe I never knew before, but I know now, because every time I close my eyes, I see you. Every time I sit in meetings, all I can think about is what you might be sketching in that book of yours. Every night, this penthouse feels like a prison without you in it. If that is not love, then tell me what else it could be." Amanda's tears fell harder, her chest aching as she whispered, "I want to believe you, God, I want to, but I cannot trust words anymore. I need actions. I need to see that you will not hide me when the world comes crashing, that you will not treat me as less because of where I come from, that you will not make me invisible again." Alexander nodded quickly, desperation roughening his voice. "Then I will prove it. I will prove it every day, for as long as it takes. I will stand in front of the world and call you mine, not because of the contract, but because I choose you." Amanda shook with sobs collapsing against him, her forehead pressed to his chest as his arms wrapped around her, and in that moment, both of them were stripped bare. Their wounds laid open, her fear of abandonment and his fear of betrayal, colliding until they melted into something fragile yet real. Their breakdown was not a clean release, but a storm of emotion. And as they held on to each other like survivors of a shipwreck, Amanda whispered, "If you hurt me again, I will never forgive you." And Alexander whispered back then, "I will spend the rest of my life making sure I never give you reason to." And in that fragile embrace, something shifted, not the end of fear or pain, but the beginning of a fragile hope that perhaps they could build something stronger than both. The board of Knight Enterprises thought they could bury the scandal with silence, but Alexander had other plans, because for the first time in his life, he realized silence was not protection, but betrayal. And if he wanted Amanda to believe his love was real, He had to face the world with her at his side. So when his grandmother called a press conference to calm investors, he made a choice that startled even her. He told her plainly that he would not stand before cameras to deny Amanda or their child instead. He would claim them both. The old woman studied him with sharp eyes and then slowly nodded perhaps, for the first time seeing in him the courage of a man willing to stake everything on more than money. The day of the conference came, and the atrium of Knight Enterprises filled with reporters, flashes, bursting voices rising. Investors tense in the front rows, waiting for Alexander to control the damage. Amanda stood hidden behind a curtain, her palms sweating, her stomach turning. She had not agreed to this. She thought it was just another statement of denial. But when Alexander stepped onto the stage, the room hushed. His tall figure, framed by the gleaming logo of the empire, he commanded. And he began to speak, not with cold precision, but with a steadiness that carried weight. He said there has been much speculation, much rumor, and much contempt aimed at someone who does not deserve it. Let me end it now. Yes, I am with Amanda Carter. Yes, she was once the janitor who cleaned my floors, but she is also the woman who cleaned my heart of its arrogance. She is carrying my child, and she is the person I love. The room erupted, gasps and shouts colliding with the feverish click of cameras. Amanda felt her knees weaken behind the curtain, her heart slamming in her chest, unable to believe the words she was hearing. And then Alexander did something bolder. He turned and extended his hand, calling her out before the world. Amanda's breath caught, every instinct telling her to run, to hide. But when she saw the certainty in his eyes, the vulnerability of a man bearing his truth, she stepped forward, her simple dress a stark contrast to the glamour of the stage. Yet in that moment, she outshone everyone. The crowd roared louder, questions flying like arrows. But Alexander ignored them, taking her hand firmly, lifting it as if to show her to the world. And then in front of flashing cameras, he spoke again. I once thought love was weakness, that everything could be bought or bargained. But I was wrong. Amanda taught me that love cannot be purchased. It must be chosen, and today I choose her not as scandal, not as liability, but as my future then. He turned to her, lowering his voice, but still audible through the microphones. Marry me, Amanda, marry me now. The world fell silent, reporters stunned, investors gaping even. His grandmother's sharp composure cracked into a rare expression of shock. Amanda's eyes filled with tears, her breath ragged. Alexander squeezed her hand, whispering actions, not words, and she realized he was keeping his promise, proving himself before everyone. Her lips trembled as she whispered yes. The room erupted again, but this time not with mockery, but with awe, the story shifting before their eyes from scandal to redemption. And within days, the impromptu proposal turned into a small but breathtaking wedding. The press was invited, and the public watched as the billionaire, who had been branded cold and heartless, stood at the altar with the woman no one thought belonged in his world. Amanda in a simple white gown, Alexander in a black suit, their hands entwined as they spoke. Vows that silenced cynics and melted critics. I vow never to let pride silence my love. Alexander said, his voice steady but his eyes wet. And Amanda answered, I vow never to let fear stop me from believing in us. The ceremony ended with their kiss, not staged, not stiff, but raw and filled with a tenderness that spoke louder than any headline. The cameras captured it. and for once the media did not twist the story but embraced it. Billionaire finds love with janitor scandal, turns into fairy tale Knight Enterprises stock. Even rose as the narrative of redemption spread, investors reassured not just by Alexander's boldness, but by the authenticity that people craved. In a world of polished lies, the very thing that had threatened to ruin him had become the foundation of a new image. One built not on ruthless power, but on humanity. For Amanda, the wedding was surreal. One day she had been invisible, mocked and dismissed the next. She was standing in front of the world as the chosen bride of the man who had once offered her money. Like she was a commodity, now holding her, as though she were priceless, as they walked out of the hall together. Cheers echoing around them, Amanda whispered, "You turned me into a spectacle, Alexander." And he smiled down at her. "No, you turned me into a man capable of love." And together they faced the flashing cameras, no longer ashamed, but proud because their story was no longer one of contract and scandal. It was a love that had endured humiliation, fear, and pride, and emerged stronger. And though Amanda knew challenges still lay ahead, in that moment she believed they could withstand anything as long as they stood side by side. Months passed after the whirlwind wedding, and the world that once mocked them now watched with fascination as Amanda Carter, once the invisible janitor of Knight Enterprises, carried her first child with grace and strength, her belly rounding as Alexander walked proudly at her side through charity galas and company functions where whispers of scandal had been replaced by admiration, the media dubbing her the unexpected Cinderella of New York. Yet to Alexander she was never a fairy tale, but the woman who had taught him to breathe again. The day Amanda went into labor, dawned stormy thunder rumbling over the city, and Alexander was a frantic mess pacing the hospital corridor, his powerful hands trembling his face. Pale investors had never seen him falter. Rivals had never seen him crack. But now, as he heard her cries of pain behind the delivery room door, he was reduced to desperate prayers, whispered under his breath, when at last the shrill cry of a newborn pierced the storm outside. Alexander stumbled into the room, his chest heaving, tears blurring his vision, as a nurse placed a tiny bundle into Amanda's arms. The baby girl was red-faced, squalling perfect, and Amanda wept openly, whispering, "Welcome home, my love." Alexander pressed a trembling hand to the child's soft cheek, his heart splitting open. In that moment, the empire he had built, the billions in his accounts, meant nothing compared to the miracle that fit in his wife's arms. He kissed Amanda's damp forehead, whispering, "Thank you for giving me more than I deserve." Weeks later, the three of them settled into a rhythm of sleepless nights and soft lullabies. Alexander, once cold and distant, now hummed off key songs in the nursery, while Amanda laughed their daughter's tiny fingers, clutching his tie as if anchoring him to a new life. Yet Alexander did not forget Amanda's dreams. One evening, as she sat rocking the baby, he placed a crisp envelope in her lap, puzzled. She opened it and gasped. Inside was an admission letter to Columbia University's architecture program. Fully funded, her name printed in bold letters. Her hands shook as she whispered, "Alexander, what did you do?" And he knelt before her, his face alight with pride, saying, "You dreamed of building worlds, Amanda, and now you will. I want our daughter to see her mother, not just as a survivor, but as a creator." Amanda burst into tears, clutching him. Overwhelmed by love and gratitude, Months turned into years, and Amanda balanced motherhood and her studies with relentless determination, often staying up late sketching designs while Alexander dozed on the couch with their daughter sprawled across his chest. Sometimes Amanda doubted herself, fearing she was not good enough. But Alexander never let her sink, always reminding her, "You are stronger than you know." One spring morning, Amanda presented her first completed design to her professors, a community library for underprivileged neighborhoods inspired by the town she had grown up in. When the design received praise, she raced home to Alexander, who listened as she spoke. With the fire of the girl she once thought she had lost, he kissed her and said, "You are not just the love of my life, Amanda. You are the future of this city." The years softened Alexander's rough edges and deepened Amanda's confidence together. They became more than a couple, they became a story of hope told in newspapers, whispered in classrooms, celebrated at charity galas. The billionaire who found love with the janitor and built a family rooted in dreams, not power. Their daughter grew into a laughing child, chasing butterflies in Central Park, where Amanda often sat with sketchbooks, Alexander at her side, watching his two girls with eyes full of quiet gratitude. One evening, as the sun sank over the skyline, Amanda turned to him, her voice gentle, yet sure love cannot be bought. "Alexander, it must be built," and he drew her and their daughter into his arms, pressing a kiss to her temple as he whispered, "And this is the only empire I will never let fall." In that moment, Amanda knew that her life had been remade, not by money, but by resilience, faith, and the courage to love. And Alexander knew that for all his billions, his true fortune was the family in his arms. The story that began with a shocking proposal had ended with something no contract could ever guarantee: a home, a dream, and a love that would endure beyond the glitter of wealth. Their journey had been imperfect, messy, full of tears and fears, but in its imperfections lay its beauty, for love that is tested and survives becomes unbreakable. And so Alexander Knight, once the untouchable CEO, and Amanda Carter, once the invisible janitor, walked hand in hand into a future where power meant nothing without love. Their daughter's laughter echoing as the sound of healing, the city lights shimmering above them like blessings. The story of Alexander Knight and Amanda Carter began with a contract worth $3 million, but ended with a journey of love that no amount of money could ever buy. And if you have followed their path until this moment, you know it was not just about a billionaire and a janitor. It was about two people who carried wounds and fears, yet found in each other the strength to heal and the courage to dream again. Amanda once thought she would spend her life cleaning hallways in silence, but by daring to accept a challenge that terrified her, she discovered not only a new chance for her future, but also a love that saw her worth beyond poverty or status. Alexander once believed that love was weakness and that children could be bargained into existence. But when he held Amanda's hand in front of flashing cameras, and when he first heard his daughter cry, he learned that love is not a transaction. It is a legacy and a daily choice. Their journey shows that healing does not come in a single moment, but in every decision to stay when it would be easier to run, in every word of forgiveness, when pride wants to shout, in every dream nurtured, even when the world doubts you. And maybe that is why their story resonates, because in a world that often feels cold and transactional, we still long for love that risks everything to be true. So now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this story from? Tell me your city, your state, or your country in the comments, and let us see how far the echoes of Alexander and Amanda's love can reach across the world. Because love has no borders, it can reach from New York to Los Angeles, from Texas to Toronto, from London to Manila, to every place where hearts still hope. If you were touched by their journey, do not keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone you care about. A friend who needs hope, a sibling who needs to believe in dreams again, or maybe someone who just needs a reason to smile today. And if you want to continue walking through these journeys of romance, heartbreak, and redemption with me, make sure you subscribe to this channel every week. I will bring you another story of unexpected love. Maybe a cowboy who finds his heart in the laughter of a school teacher, or a single mother who discovers she is cherished by the billionaire she thought would never notice her. Each story is a reminder that no matter how impossible love seems, it can still arrive when we least expect it. And one last thing, rate this story from 1 to 10 in the comments, because your feedback is the heartbeat that keeps this channel alive. Your ratings guide me to create stories that bring you to tears of pain, then tears of joy that make you gasp with shock, then sigh with relief. So thank you for staying with Alexander and Amanda until the very end. And remember, true love is never perfect, but it is always worth it.